Hello everyone and welcome. This is my guide to how the guild I'm in defeats the Death raid rift. Like the other raid rifts, this rift is designed to be done by 10 people, but up to 20 can be in the raid and eligible for loot and the inscribed source stone. It is probably advisable to bring a few extra people at least for the first few attempts just to make things a bit easier. It requires 2 tanks with over 100 toughness, and we use a healer on each one, along with some other healers just doing general raid damage. The DPS will require at least 100 hit or focus. This is the first stage of the rift, and it is a pretty straightforward one. You have 4 groups of 2 golems and a caster each. We have one tank pick up the 2 golems, and the other tank pick up the caster. The golems need to be killed before the caster can take damage, so we DPS down each one and then move on to the other. The golems cleave and do a knockback, so be careful of the positioning of them so that you don't pull any extra groups or get your DPS killed. There will be a little bit of raid damage flying around from the caster, but this should be easily healed through. When the last caster dies, run out of the rift to avoid pulling the next stage. And here we are in the second stage, where we have to kill the 4 Dark Attendants. Now, to do this phase, before you engage the Dark Attendants, you must make sure that your tank has used one of the nether generators that they stand next to. This will give them a buff. On anyone that doesn't have this buff, the Attendants will hit like a truck and will probably 1 or 2 shot your tanks. These mobs cleave, so DPS needs to be careful. There's a slight DPS check to this phase, as the buff will run out on the tank eventually, and after that things get messy, so DPS need to make sure this doesn't happen. The main problem here is the tank getting the buff without aggroing the mob. If the tank approaches the generator from directly opposite the opposite side of where the attendant is, they should be able to get the debuff safely. When the last attendant is dead, use the last generator to complete this phase. This then brings us to the third phase. This is a pretty easy fight mechanics wise, it's just tricky when it comes to the actual execution. You start with the flesh terror in the centre. The tank pulls him and you DPS him down. He doesn't have any particular abilities at the moment, but when he dies is where the fun starts. He will split into 2 smaller terrors, and when each of these dies they will split into 2 smaller ones, and so on and so on. When he first splits, have a tank pick up each one and move them apart. The raid should focus down one of these and then focus on the adds that spawn from this one, and so on down the line until you've entirely killed one half of it. Don't use any AoE abilities, as when each one of these dies it does an AoE explosion for about 2000 to 2500 damage, which has quite a large range and is quite a good way of getting your raid killed if you accidentally kill about 3 or 4 of them at once. Make sure someone is marking the target to kill, or someone is appointed as a main assist and have all the DPS following this one, and all should be okay. When the last one is killed, the stage is complete. Just make sure that when the stage does finish you're ready to run out quickly, so as not to accidentally pull the things from the next stage. And now we have the fourth phase, which is just mainly plain annoying. It's all mainly about how good your tanks are at pulling. 8 death wisps will spawn in the middle, and you need a tank to pull one of them back to your raid individually. The reason to do this is the wisps will charge members of your raid and do an AoE. They also cleave. Both of these hit quite firmly, but should be healable through as long as you've only pulled a single one. It is quite possible for the AoE from 2 to just kill someone if they both happen at the same time, which is the reason why we try to only pull one at a time. They move around quite a bit in the middle of the rift, so if you do happen to pull 2 by accident, try to focus down the first one as quickly as possible, while healers try to keep as many people up as possible. When the last one dies, it is the end of the phase. This brings us on to the 5th and final phase of the rift, against Luther's Darkblade. And this guy should probably be pretty embarrassed to be the final boss of a raid rift. He should not pose much of a problem to any raid that has made it this far already. His main ability is that he spawns 2 different types of adds. Both of these need to be grabbed by the off tank and moved off to the side away from the rest of the raid members. The first type of this will explode after a short amount of time, doing significant damage to anyone around them, while the second will put a buff on Lucas, which redirects all damage he takes to the add. Just have the off tank on these adds, and the DPS remain on the main boss throughout the entire fight, as the first add will just explode after a set amount of time, and the second type of add will just die from the damage done to it from the damage being taken by the boss. Other than the adds, the boss has a cleave, so all DPS need to position themselves accordingly. He also puts a debuff on the main tank, which reduces the healing that he receives. This can mean that a tank swap becomes necessary, but it is quite possible for the debuff to just fall off the tank if he gets a series of blocks, parries or dodges in. Once the boss is killed, the rift is complete. There we go, I've been Zero Override, and I hope you have success in defeating this rift.